Unfortunately, this video is a redo of last night's Zoom session as we had technical difficulties with the audio portion. I apologize for that, and we'll get started with the information right now. Okay, we start things off with the Open Girls Championship, and our crew of Kimberly, Denitra, and Heather have some really good stuff for us. Let's take a look. Okay, we'll start things off with a correct call dealing with a situation that could be either a hold or a held ball. Also included is the correct spot location. Okay, let's break it down. So as you can see here, white 24 clearly holds black number 2 prior to any possible held ball situation. This is the reason why I selected this as a kudo. Unfortunately, some officials, we allow this kind of action to take place. Now, obviously, this action here, this hug with the left arm, that's probably a little bit too obvious. But sometimes we see a hell ball that actually starts like this situation here, where the right arm and hand of the white jersey player actually holds and on a reach in type of situation before she actually gets to the ball. And so what we do is we let the play continue, and then there is actually a hell ball situation. But of course, a foul should be ruled first, which we can see clearly takes place here. So as a result, that is the reason why Heather gets the, I'm sorry, Kimberly gets the kudo for this. So as we get back to live action here, we can see there's where the hell ball is, and that's what I meant by sometimes that's what gets ruled instead of the foul. As I mentioned at the start, this clip actually is featured for two kudos. The second part deals with the correct throw-in spot. Remember, that has been a focus all fall to make sure that we have accurate locations for our throw-in. So even though that foul situation occurred up near the jump circle, the Heather Trail does a good job of making sure that that comes in, and we move it up to the 28-foot nearest applicable designated throw-in spot. Well done. Okay, kudo number 2 features a correct call in relationship to a travel. Now, some of you may say that this is an obvious travel foul and travel violation, and as a result, why is it kudo worthy? The reason why I selected this is because sometimes we have a tendency to rule travels just because the play looks awkward. So, yes, this does end up in a travel situation and it is awkward, but it also gives us a chance to focus on the main point in being able to make accurate travel rulings, and that is to identify the pivot foot. And again, this also features that spin move that always is a challenging situation. And I think Heather does a good job here in being patient and making sure that she doesn't call this too early just because the player is out of balance. So, specific breakdown of this, as we can see, white number 11 establishes her left foot as her pivot foot as she begins that dreaded spin move. So as the play continues, she picks up her pivot foot, which is legal, of course, at this particular point, but our antennas need to go up to make sure we understand what she's going to do next. She needs to release the ball or call timeout before that pivot foot returns to the floor. Let's see what happens. And lo and behold, she does place that left pivot foot back on the floor. So as a result, this is the reason why we have a correct call ruling for a travel infraction. All right, kudo number 3, a correct call for a hand checking foul. Okay, before we get to the actual breakdown of this hand checking situation, I do want to address a question that I've received, and that was in regard to Jeff, why are you featuring hand checking? It's pretty basic. The situation is that what happens is that we do have some officials that still feel that this is a ticky tack foul and that they don't call it. And we need to be reminded that the Federation, about 10 years ago, decided that because we weren't making these kinds of rulings, they had to make it specific and list the four different actions in regards to a hand checking rule. So the last 3 or 4 weeks I have featured, and thankfully it was easy to do as all of our crews had hand checking situation. You may recall, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had one where each of the crew members had a different hand checking foul situation throughout the game. And since we had one here fairly early in the second quarter, I thought it was worthy that we emphasize the fact that not only do we have crew situation, but we have, I hope, association consistency in regards to the hand checking rule. So specifically now when we get back to live action, what I counted was at least 4 times where the hand was on, off, and we know that that's one of the four criteria to go along with the hand checking rule. So let's take a specific look. So here we see the rule placing and keeping the front or back of the hand on the ball handler is one of the four criteria for a foul. Of course, the other three are having two hands on, one hand that stays on, and the fourth, of course, which is the extended arm bar situation. So hopefully we can stay steady as an association and make good rulings as it pertains to the hand checking rule. So our next kudo features a correct call dealing with an over the back rebounding situation. So black number 15 is able to secure this rebound as she is taller, stays within her vertical space, and she does not displace her opponent. As a result, this is a legal play. I like this clip because it does help explain the situation of the term over the back versus on the back. Now, obviously, over the back means that there's space in between the player, or there may be a slight contact, but it's not a situation where a player has been displaced or anything. On the back is pretty obvious. That means that the player has been affected either rhythm, speed, balance, or quickness, or has been displaced. But we should remember that we can't penalize a player for just simply being taller and being in the right spot. And also the fact that she's entitled to a vertical space, and if she can reach up and over the back, then that is fine. We just have to have confidence that when we hear somebody saying, come on, ref, that's a foul, they're over the back, they're over the back. We have to know in our mind of minds, because we have good rules knowledge, that over the back is perfectly okay because there is no illegal contact involved. And we just basically let those comments go in one ear and out the other. So let's look at this play from the other side of the court, and it will reinforce the situation of being over and not on. As we're going to see by our graphic here, we can see the vertical plane of the two players. As a result, black is clearly in her space. She is over with longer arms, of course, but really has not displaced the white jersey player. In fact, when we get back to the white live action, the white jersey player actually backs into her a little bit. Not saying that it was a foul, but definitely this is not a foul on black, despite probably a little bit of screaming and hollering in the stands to that effect. Now, hopefully, you keen observers did notice that there was actually a second on the back situation in this rebounding sequence. We kind of lucked out in this. So we get a chance to now focus on the term being put on the back. Clearly, there's a second situation where there is a player on the back. The question is, did the player behind put herself on the back, or that was a defensive player, or did the offensive player back into her and back her out of there? Hopefully, you did see that. If not, let's take a look at it. Okay, we do need to set this play up because it's a little difficult to see the beginning as white number 21 is screened off by white number 11 here. But white 21 is going to end up displacing black number 12 from the low block. Notice the verticality line here and what's going to happen in regards to where the players end up. And let's get back to live. So as we can see, 21 is waddling her way backward into the body of black number 12. And to the untrained eye, most observers would say, well, number 2 is clearly on her back. The question is, how did she get there? She didn't put herself there. As a result, that foul does not belong to black number 12, but does belong to white 21, who has displaced that black jersey player number 2. Remember, the original vertical line is right here, and she has moved her from under the basket all the way to the middle of the lane. Obviously, that is illegal contact, and Denitra makes a good ruling on that play situation. Kudo number 4 is another correct call on a situation that is becoming more prevalent in our game, and that is when the offense initiates the contact. In this situation, it's going to be on a dribble drive where the offensive player is going to lean into the defensive player in an attempt to get the foul, only she is the one that actually is responsible for the contact and was correctly ruled by our officials. So let's take a look at it. Actually, before we get to the play, let's just review the illegal contact wording in the rule book. Remember that contact that illegally interferes with an opponent's ability to make, in this case, defensive maneuvers, should be ruled a foul. A lot of times, we think on a dribble drive, it's a situation where the defense is responsible for the illegal contact. But as I mentioned, we're seeing more and more offense-initiated contact, and this is a good example of it. And so examples of illegal contact that go either way, and that's the point in this whole clip. This time it's the offense that's going to use the torso or the shoulders to charge into and displace the defensive player. And also that contact is going to block or impede the defense's movements. And as a result, was correctly ruled a player control foul. Okay, Kudo number 5 features 2 reasons why it is a Kudo. Obviously, we have to deal with a rule situation, and what we have been featuring all fall is loose ball foul situations and how we need to help ourselves improve in making more accurate rulings there. We're going to have two situations actually, Kudo 5 and 6. Also, we're going to take a look at the crew procedure, which is also Kudo worthy. Now, I realize we just had this graphic, but it's important to make sure that it works in both directions. So as we can see here, We're going to have a situation where the contact is going to still involve torso to shoulders, charging into and displacing an opponent, and blocking and impeding an opponent. Because the ball is loose, we have to keep all of those items in mind and determine which player is responsible for offending those particular items. So let's take a look. So the black lines represent the path of the white jersey player, and I think we can agree that white number 11's rhythm, speed, balance, and quickness has been affected by the contact of the black jersey player, and as a result, the black jersey player was correctly ruled for a fouling situation. And as we've done throughout the fall, there are situations where we have a crew that does an excellent job with their signals and procedures, and I like to feature them, especially for new folks in regard to learning crew of three, or those people that are just starting and they want to learn some polished situation. So we do have a couple of good examples here of correct procedure as it pertains to this foul. Obviously, when we have a foul, we have switching situations that have to be dealt with, and this crew handled them perfectly. So to start things off, our calling official does report the foul. It's a little bit difficult to see because she's screened out here, but she just turns, makes the report, and does an excellent job of making sure that everybody understands what the situation. So our second look is at our old lead, who now becomes the new trail. She monitors the players as she moves into her new center position on the table side. And last but definitely not least is the importance of understanding what happens to the official that's opposite the table when they're not when they're not the calling official. So our center prepares to initiate the switch, and she also monitors the players as she moves to her new her new lead position on the table side. And I should have mentioned also that, of course, our calling official in Arizona, we go opposite. So any transfers on the call, that's important to note. And it may be probably the most biggest adjustment that you'll have to make is that if you come from a state or an area that went table side after a foul, that's something that you're going to have to work on. And of course, the last important accuracy here in the throw in spot, which we are reinforcing this fall. Denitra does a nice job of making sure that this does get moved up to the applicable 28-foot line on the sideline over here, even though the foul was closer to the division line. This is well done. So now we feature the second loose ball situation where a correct call was adjudicated, and again another good example of crew procedure for those of you that are trying to polish or learn crew of three situations. Now, before we look at the specifics of that play, I do want to make sure that we understand a change. I shouldn't say a change, a clarification that came about last year. This slide actually was taken out of the video from last year's new rules presentation, and it was a clarification in regards to the status of the player of a player that's on the floor. As we can see here, that if contact with an opponent who is lying on the floor inhibits freedom of movement or prevents normal offensive or defensive maneuvers, it is a foul. And this clearly is the situation that we have here. Sometimes we would get that backwards, but now legal position is not obtained on the floor like we see here because it causes the player to lose their balance and quickness and etc. So as we can see here, based on the slide from last year's clarification, black number 10 does not have a legal position on the floor and thus is responsible for any illegal contact. Because as we can see, white number 11 was standing and she was moving in a forward direction, and that obviously is going to be interfered with, and she's going to end up falling on number 10. However, number 10, as we just said, is responsible for that contact. So this probably would be a legal fumble recovery in football, but that is, of course, not the situation in basketball. One thing that we have to guard against is the misconception that when the ball is loose, basically we just let the players play. We do hear that a lot, but we've got to make sure that they play legally and safely. And as I mentioned, we do have a couple of good examples here of the procedure in a situation like this. Obviously, we have a foul, and that's going to involve switching and changing of positions. Let's take a look. To begin, we see our non-calling opposite the table official. She knows that she has to switch and does a nice job of initiating that switch by moving to her new position on the table side. Our calling official indicates the throw-in spot and moves to her new center position across from the table. I cannot emphasize enough the significance of indicating the throw-in spot clearly so that all partners know where the ball is coming back in play. That is the reason why we have such a smooth situation of the switch here, because our calling official does an excellent job of indicating that throw-in spot. And of course, our new lead needs to go over on the table side, as that is the side where the ball is coming into play. Just in case you haven't had enough clips in regards to travel, we have another correct call ruling that we can learn from. Blank number 1 ends her dribble with her left foot on the floor, which makes that her pivot foot. He then jumps off that pivot foot and was given the benefit of the doubt in live action of landing simultaneously. Now, that's not a criticism. Please understand that when a player lands simultaneously, sometimes it isn't exactly 100% perfect. It is if we have luxury of a stop action with obviously a video like this. But in real life, we got to not split hairs. If it's really close, then we give them the benefit of the doubt. And I think the official in this particular case did exactly the correct thing there. What we're talking about with not landing simultaneously, and sometimes you can hear it, if it's like this, that obviously is not simultaneous. But if it's like that, that is just too close in live action to rule that aspect of the situation as a travel. So up to this point, she's jumped off her foot, off her pivot foot. In other words, has lifted it and put it back on the floor. That may sound like a contrary statement because we've been harping on lifting the pivot foot and putting it back on the floor as a travel. But remember, the rules do allow for a jump stop. And the reason for that is because obviously the rules committee realized that players moving at a fast speed could not necessarily sometimes come to a dead halt, and therefore they incorporated the jump stop as a means of being legal. However, the stipulation, and that's the important stipulation, is it must be a simultaneous landing. So in this situation, neither foot may be the pivot foot as she has landed simultaneously. After a player comes to a stop, when neither foot can be the pivot, they can lift one or both of the feet, but they may not return them to the floor before releasing the ball on a pass or a try or obviously a timeout. Now that she lifts her right foot and places it back on the floor, that's where the traveling infraction occurred, and Denitra does a nice job of making that correct call. All right, now for another correct call dealing with an offense initiated contact. As we mentioned earlier, the offensive player initiating contact is becoming way more prevalent in our game. Previously, we saw the offensive player using her shoulder and hip. In this one, we're going to see that the player is going to use their arm to shove the defensive player away and provide extra space. Let's take a look. White number 10 uses her right arm and pushes her defender away, and Kimberly is jolly on the spot with a player control foul. Nice job. On to Kudo number 9. No call correct. Now, as you can see, this is going to be a loose ball situation, but it's going to be somewhat different than what we've been doing all fall. And this one is a good example, especially for new officials, not to try to bail out when you see a loose ball situation and call an early held ball. What's going to happen here? We're going to see the ball is going to squirt loose. It's going to end up looking like a pinball machine, ball bouncing all over the place. And our crew does an excellent job of having a disciplined whistle and wait until we either see illegal contact or a held ball situation. As it turns out, it's just going to be a mad scramble without any whistles, but it's a fine job of allowing players to continue and not interrupt when it was not needed. Next, we look at a kickball violation situation and another good example of the correct throw in spot. White number 10 illegally contacts the ball with her foot. As a result, we have a kickball infraction. Didn't pick this so much for the infraction as it's pretty obvious, but I want to draw attention to the location of where it occurred. 2 years ago, that throw in would occur right there where that ball was located, as you can see. But now we know that we have to go up to the 28-foot sideline, a 28-foot spot on the sideline. There's the kick occurred outside of the 3 point arc, and now violations go to one of the 8 designated throw in spots. Thus, the reason for this kudo. And I should also mention that you'll notice that Denitra Trail is also going to make sure that the shot clock gets reset on a defensive violation by twirling the hand. That's the shot clock reset signal. Nice job. This kudo is selected as a result of another teaching moment for new officials, learning crew of 3, as the crew does an excellent job after this violation in getting in the correct position. So what we have is an out of bounds situation on the center sideline in the backcourt. This will now make this obviously a front court throw in. And since that is our new Trails sideline, she will stay and administer the throw in on her own sideline. And over on the far sideline, our old Trail becomes the new lead on this side. While at the same time, the old lead becomes the new center on the far sideline. And the best part of this kudo is the hustle that is demonstrated by our new center and our new lead in getting to their spot. And Heather does a nice job at getting distance and making the bounce pass on the throw in. Well done. And now it's on to the boys' game with the fine crew of Jay, Jeff, and Mick, who also have some nice information and demonstration for us as we progress through the Open Boys Tournament. As been the case all fall, we feature many travel situations to help improve our calling accuracy. We start off with a correct call traveling, and I believe this is going to be the jump stop, similar to the girls' game, but with a little different twist. So our initial teaching point basically is the same. We see that the player in black number 3 ends his dribble with both feet on the floor. At this point, either foot may become the pivot foot. So as play continues, he jumps off his right foot and lands simultaneously. Obviously, at this point, everything is legal. However, as we mentioned in the girls' game, neither foot may be lifted and placed back on the floor prior to prior to releasing the ball. And as we just saw, he is going to now step back with his right foot. And remember, he could not place that back on the floor. Once he does, he is committed a traveling infraction. We do need to take a second or two to make a friendly reminder in regard to the resumption of play throw-in spot. If you recall, the violation occurred inside the three-point arc, so the throw-in obviously should be on the 3-foot line on the end line. On to Kudo number 2, which is going to feature a position adjust for an open view. We've been featuring that all fall. We have another good example here of how our official is going to work to get the open view, which of course is our number one priority in our accuracy improvement hopes. So here we can see our center J has got into the straight line position. Please understand this is not a criticism as this happens as the ball is being quickly passed around. The key thing here to note is though is that J does not accept this straight line position, which of course we have been using this diagram up here to demonstrate that. And what's going to happen is he is going to position adjust to get the open view and we get back to live action. And so now we take a look at the other graphic of the open view, which we prefer obviously as much as possible when the play lends itself to it, where we can see both players and the ball. And what happened here is we see Jay instinctively adjust his position and obtains the more favorable open view look. Also, you'll notice it isn't really, a jackrabbit type thing. It's just a casual sliding of position, maybe a step or two one way, one left or right, one way or the other. Well done. And just like many of the kudos this fall, we have another correct call dealing with a player control foul situation, and it gives us a chance to really get the main points of emphasis in our heads in making rulings on block charge plays. And once again, we like to recommend that officials, especially new officials, if you can develop a mental checklist of the three major aspects of getting a legal guarding position, that may help you. Obviously, 2 feet touching the playing court and in the path of the opponent. Facing the opponent, that's a basketball facing, and they got there before they left the floor. And this situation is a good example of these three items. So we can see that black 4 has checked all the boxes. He's in the path, he's got 2 feet on the floor, and he's facing his opponent. And obviously, that doesn't involve an airborne shooter, so they're all checked. So now the onus is on that white jersey player. If we do have torso to torso contact, then we have the potential for a player control foul. We do need to take a couple seconds to remind us that we do need to stop the clock signal on all whistles, as it helps reduce the chance for conflicting rulings. Also, it should be noted that our lead does use the proper directional signal with an open hand as opposed to the punch. And we do recommend, obviously, that the behind the head signal indicating a player control foul would also be appropriate in this situation. I think it was quickly there, but holding it a little bit longer might have been a little bit better use of that signal. Before we move on, we need to take advantage of this second camera angle, which gives us a chance to talk about a more advanced technique. For up and coming officials, listen carefully on this. What happens here is that our lead does a great job in refereeing the defense by focusing on the secondary defender. If you can see here, black number 21 was the original primary defender. White number 10 gets his head and shoulders passed, and as a result, the official that was primarily responsible for the initial ball matchup now has to concede to the lead in this particular case, who picks up black number 4, who has now jumped to the spot here and obtained legal guarding position, which we've already talked about. So as the secondary defender, we need to referee the defense. We've talked a little bit about that this fall, but remember that if we pick this up late, you're going to react, and most likely you're not going to be able to check all the boxes because we didn't pick them up quick enough. So pick up that secondary defender, have eye discipline, don't watch the ball as white number 10 comes driving through, find the defense and check the boxes. Hope that makes sense. And now on to our fourth kudo, a correct call dealing with a blocking foul that causes an out of bounds situation. So just like what we discussed in the last block charge situation, this is a two official play. What we mean by that is our center has an open view of the contact, which caused the ball handler to step out of bounds. As a result, we've done a good job of covering this play. In fairness to our lead official, he's in the middle of a rotation and he basically is straight lined again through no fault of his own. He does observe the foot on the line and obviously is about ready to make that ruling. The good news here, however, is our central official stays with that matchup. And the reason for that is because it came out of his primary coverage area, down that alley, which is outside the three-point arc, and he stayed with the drive, and he could clearly see The bump is the reason why the white jersey player actually stepped on the line, and as a result, we got this correctly as the crew. Good job. Kudo number 5 is clearly a crew kudo as it deals with the shot clock. I don't think we've had too many situations with the shot clock, and this one is going to serve as a prime example of being aware of the shot clock. Let's take a look. So I'm not going to say too much about this. I'm just going to let this still graphic show what amazing job that these three gentlemen have done. As you can see, the shot clock has wound down to 7 here, and just as if it was choreographed, all three officials are reminding each other that we've got to be really on our toes. Our antenna has to be up and be ready for basically a last second situation. Extremely well done. As we have done all this fall, we're going to take a short break from the kudo to take advantage of a learning situation that presented itself in this game. And the reason why we are focusing on this, and as we have done in the past, is because this is a point of emphasis for 2025-26 season in dealing with continuous motion. So just to refresh our memory in regard to the continuous motion rule, remember it does have to involve and only involve a defensive foul. The key thing and the point of emphasis that needs to be driven home is that remember continuous motion allows the shooter to complete their arm movement, and most importantly, and this is the part that the Federation decided to emphasize this fall, is that the player is allowed to pivot or step while holding the ball. Now, of course, they still have to do it legally, but that pivot and step is a key. Sometimes we think that once they are stepping or pivoting, that means that they are on the floor and therefore they're not in the act of shooting. That's what we have got to make sure that we guard against, that they are allowed to complete their usual foot and body movement, habitual throwing motion, and that goes before a try. As we can see in the still photograph, this player is clearly on the floor, but he obviously is attempting to score. Even though the ball is low, he's going to bring his arms up, and he probably is going to take a step with that left leg legally. And there, as a result, he's in the act of shooting, and should he be fouled, he is entitled to free throws. So in breaking it down, we see white 10 ends his dribble right here. This marks the beginning of being in the act of shooting, even though he's on the floor. So here we see that he's beginning his habitual arm and leg movement, and now the foul occurs. So since that foul occurred while he was in the habitual throwing motion, this is being fouled in the act of shooting, and as a result is entitled to 2 free throws, regardless of the bonus situation. Our 8th kudo is a no call correct on a block shot attempt. So as it turned out, we lucked out here in regard to this particular play, although it isn't exact. What I mean by that is we did receive an inquiry. I should say the AIA office received an inquiry from an official someplace, and they, well, I'll read it to you. They were concerned that people aren't explaining the new rules correctly, especially about the ball hitting the backboard. The player can still pin it on the backboard as long as he or she made contact with the ball before it hit the backboard. A lot of coaches are frustrated because they've all been told different things. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to answer this particular individual's concern and also to clarify a couple of things in regards to the new rule that now is in effect. This play isn't exactly the same, but it's close enough so that we can, I think, figure it out and sort through the details. So let's take a look. So the item of note here, this play is different than the new rules that we talked about in regard to contacting a ball after it hits the board. And the reason why this is timely, because it does address the official's concern that this ball is not going to be actually pinned against the board, but it very well could have been. So as we can see, the ball is contacted before it hits the backboard and it's on its upward flight. As a result, this is a legal play. And if it actually had been pinned against the board, that also would have been a legal play. But let's now take a couple of hypothetical situations and at the same time explain the new rule by using this graphic. So we'll start off with the actual new rule wording. And as we can see here, we're talking about goaltending. The ball that contacts the backboard is considered to be on its downward flight. In such a case, it is goaltending when the ball is touched by a player as long as it has the possibility of entering the basket. So there's a couple of things to note. First of all, when the ball contacts that backboard, and the rule does say that it's on its downward flight. So even on that graphic that we just saw there, if that had in fact hit the board first, by rule, it's considered on its downward flight and therefore meets the criteria of goaltending. If that last part of that sentence is in play, it has the possibility of entering the basket. So what is meant by has the possibility of entering the basket? They're talking about if obviously the shot was coming up underneath the ring and had no way of continuing up, or if it actually looked like the ball was going to go air ball over the ring, then in that particular case it did not have a possibility of entering the basket. Hope that makes sense. The second note is also important. The rule will only apply if any part of the ball is above the ring level when the defender contacts the ball. I want to point out a couple of items and we'll go back to the still shot to do that. Okay, from this point forward, we're going to do a what if. What if the ball had contacted the backboard? Which of course is the new rule this year. So I think it would behoove us to make sure that we have a good working knowledge of that. Let's take a few minutes to examine that. So we're going to revisit those two notes again. So the ball contacts the backboard. For rule purposes, it's now considered on its downward flight. They've taken all the judgment out of it. Once we see contact, ball hitting the backboard, it's downward flight. Point two, this rule only applies if any part of the ball is above the ring. Now that's the sticky wicket. But hopefully this next comment will help. In a board like this, there's only about 6 inches from the top of, I should say, from the top of the ring to the bottom of the board. And the basketball is somewhere a little bit more than 9 inches. So as a result, it is most likely going to be a little part of that ball is going to be above the ring. And as we can see here, if any part of the ball is above the ring, then it's considered to be contacted on its downward flight. And therefore we would have goaltending. It's a little bit difficult to see here, but you can see a little tiny portion of that ball, I think, is above the ring. So even though most of it is below, this still would meet the criteria by the new rule interpretation of goaltending. Kudo number 9. No call correct dealing with verticality. Verticality is a very important topic, especially for you new folks, and we're going to kind of focus on that here in the next couple of minutes. So remember, on dribble drives to the basket, our main focus should be on that defender and seeing if they obtained legal guarding position, and knowing that once they have obtained legal guarding position, that they are allowed to jump straight up in the air in their vertical space. And I believe if you run that back, you will notice that the black jersey player did have 2 feet on the floor facing his opponent, and as a result had legal guarding position. And so even though he was off the floor, he was in a legal position. That's a key. Some people think that if they're not in contact with the floor, they're not legal. That's not true. So, you new officials on the call, hopefully you'll have your ears up for this one, because this aspect is one of the more difficult aspects to cover or understand as you're officiating your game. And that is to differentiate between contact that is legal and contact that is illegal. And you may be saying, well, I thought this was a non contact sport. That obviously is not true either. So let's revisit the incidental contact rule for a second. Please understand that when there is contact, it does not automatically qualify as a foul. That's going to be the most difficult thing for your new officials to separate. Sometimes we see officials that call every single little contact as being illegal. And hopefully we can work through this clip here and show you that in some instances there's going to be contact that is in fact legal contact because it meets the incidental contact rule. So continuing on, contact that does not interfere with an opponent's ability to make, in this case, it would be defensive maneuvers, because what's going to happen is we have the white dribble drive player coming in, and he is actually going to cause a little bit of the contact. And now, some of you may say, well, he did, it knocked him off balance, and he put him underneath the basket. This brings up the second challenge that goes with verticality, and that is having a patient whistle. We have to see that we let the play start, develop, and finish. If we blow the whistle right away, we sometimes take away the opportunity for a team to score. In this particular, or the defensive team to secure the rebound. So what's happened in this particular case, there was a little bit of contact, but let the play develop. As it turns out, we don't see it here because it's a still now, but the ball is going to go into the corner. It's not going to be able to be grabbed by 24. So as a result, this is considered to be incidental contact, and our crew here, and I emphasize the fact it's a crew decision, even though it's in a primary coverage area of our lead here, sometimes a crew member has a better angle and they might put air in the whistle because they saw a little bit of contact and they probably shouldn't have. So, but in this case, all three let this play continue, as at least in my opinion should have happened. All right, our next play deals with something I don't believe we have dealt with all fall, and that is what happens when players go to the floor. In this case, I'm saying staying with the pack on a hard foul. Let's take a look. The key thing to note in this particular situation is that we forget all about spot procedures They become secondary. We don't care about color, number, what the foul was, and what's going to happen next. We have got to turn our attention 100% to those two players on the court and make sure nothing escalates from it. As a result, this is a good kudo by both officials, as we're going to see the two closest officials hustle to the spot and they show them the stripes. Calling official is calmly going in. Obviously, I don't know exactly what was said, but I'm guessing that it was something about good hustle. Let's take it easy, guys. We got it. We called the foul. Let's get up carefully, or something to that effect. But show them the stripes. Let them know that you're there. So hoping that's going to prevent any craziness from happening. And we can't forget about our third crewmate, who does a good job of staying back. Even though we don't see him, he stays back and he observes any activity around the perimeter and especially from the benches. Sometimes when we have players that go to the floor hard like this, a player comes off the bench, just spontaneously reacts, and hopefully that we can correct anything that might escalate the situation. That would be the job of the third official, to observe that. I'm not saying he's going to go out and tackle that person, but they're going to observe, and just in case it needs to be, anything needs to be adjudicated. Cooter number 11, requesting help on an out of bounds situation where you can't make the ruling and you need to get help from your partner. So, any new officials on the call? Jeff, and Mick do a good job of giving us the procedure when we have a situation where, due to the quickness and distance of the out of bounds ball, lead correctly asks his partner for his help, and our partner quickly responds. In other words, you don't need to discuss this, you just simply give it up. As we can see here, Mick is just basically saying, I haven't got it. Give me help, Jeff. And Jeff quickly indicates the direction, and we're right back to play. Good job. I am thankful that this play happened in this game, as it deals with a play situation that is unfortunately misunderstood by some officials. Our officials are going to have a no call correct ruling on a situation where a player goes out of bounds and returns from out of bounds inbounds to save the basketball. Let's take a look. So, a couple of key aspects of this play situation. First of all, white number 13 was out of bounds. The thing that we need to determine, however, is, did he go out of bounds as a result of his own volition, or did he go out of bounds as a result of his momentum? I think it's pretty obviously that he went out due to his momentum. As a result, the rules allow him to come back onto the court, and he can actually be the first to touch the ball, contrary to what some people believe. The only catch is he has to legally return. And this is the second misunderstanding by some individuals, and that is, a legal return only involves 1 foot on the playing court with nothing touching out of bounds. Stated in a different way, if we look at it, when a player goes out of bounds, do they have to have both feet out of bounds for it to be considered that player to be out of bounds? We know the answer is no. It works in reverse as well. So as long as white number 13 here comes back into play and gets himself in bounds with 1 foot, he's perfectly legal. Now, some of you may be saying, but Jeff, look, his foot is on the line. And this is another reason why I like this clip. It gives us a chance to understand the significance of angles. This camera angle obviously is poor. It does look like that foot is on the line. However, we do not have the angle that our lead official has. As a result, we have to trust our lead official who's got that good look, and he can determine if the foot is in bounds or out of bounds. And as a result, we need to trust our partner. We need to also think about this when we're sitting in the stands, because sometimes we tend to be a little bit negative and say, well, how could they miss that? Hopefully we will, if we're in a situation where we're like this and we've got this kind of angle, we're going to say, hey, I'm sitting here and I can't make that judgment and not make any comment in regard to good, bad, or indifferent. So I want to get back to our main focus and the reason for this clip, and that is to understand that a player's status is the main learning point in this particular situation. Please don't subscribe to the myth that both feet have to be back on the playing court. That is for the people that are not trained like we are. So that concludes the kudos for our Boys and Girls Open Cruise, and we thank them for a fine job in providing us with great examples of some fine officiating. Now, before I close up shop, I do want to address one comment, I should say one question that came into the mailbox, and share that with everybody. As a result, I think we'll be better off knowing what the question was about and how to handle it. So let's take a look. So GW asks, I issued a technical foul on the 20-24-25 points of emphasis warning rule. I was questioned on the call with the coach claiming that technical fouls for warnings had to be on the same warning violation. Do the points of emphasis continue into the next year? And indeed, do the points of emphasis continue into the next year? And indeed, did I make the correct call for issuing a technical foul on two separate warnings? Now, I'm glad he or she explained the two warning situations, because I wouldn't have been able to answer the question if he or she hadn't done so. So as you can see, the first warning was a flop warning, and the second was for breaking the end line plane on a throw-in. And they obviously thank us for the look for the receiving the reply. So here's part of our reply. A team is entitled to one warning for faking, one warning for coach bench contact, and one warning for delay of game. These warnings are independent of one another. So let's take a look just quickly at the rules themselves that might help us remember this. So as we can see, these are three clearly separate rules. So what that means is each one of them requires a warning first before the technical foul. So warning for delay a game, and then a technical foul. Warning for coach team conduct, technical foul. Warning for faking being fouled, and then the technical foul. But if we have a warning for delay, and then we have a warning for faking being fouled, those are just two separate warnings, and no technical foul should be issued in those regards because they are not part of the same rule. Hopefully that visualization might help so we can remember that. And we conclude by providing a specific answer to GW's question. The points of emphasis do not carry over specifically from year to year. However, please don't misunderstand. They obviously don't just go out the window, and we revert back to the reasons why they were put there in the first place. So, yes, care about the warnings, and we do appreciate the fact that GW did get in touch with us to see if he or she made the correct ruling. So the second part to his or her question would be, the coach was in fact correct in stating that a technical foul is issued when there is only when there is a second incident in the same warning category. Thanks again for asking, and we encourage anybody to do the same should anything come up throughout the year. So this does conclude our fall Rekindling Our Basket Minds Kudos series for 2025. We thank all the officials that were involved in those games and hope that this was beneficial to those looking in. We wish you the best as the season progresses, and as always, should anything come up and you would like some further guidance, information, or questions, by all means feel free to contact us through that email address. Signing off for now. Hope to see you down the road. Be safe.